Welcome, everyone, to the Gardenerd Tip of the Week podcast, where experts from around the world talk shop, share stories, and offer their favorite tip. I'm your host, Christy Wilhelmi. We continue our series of interviews with speakers from the Heirloom Expo, recorded in September of 2023. Now, you're hearing this in November of 2023, so it's not too far off. This week, my guest is Evan Gregoire. Am I saying that right?
Close enough.
Evan Gregoire. On his farm in the Pacific Northwest, Evan supports over 500 different plant varieties each year. For the past 20 years, Evan has cultivated culinary gardens for chefs and home gardeners, collaborating to enhance the level of creativity on his farm and in kitchens. He is the founder of the Heirloom Seedhouse, and he goes by Farmer Evan. Welcome to the podcast, Farmer Evan.
Thanks for having me.
500 plant varieties is a lot. Where do you grow these, and how much space do you have to work with?
So I'd say a lot of that consists probably of peppers and tomatoes, honestly. You can grow a lot of peppers and tomatoes fairly close proximity as long as you're using some type of agronet or some type of fabric to or essentially just basically time and things like that. So space and time and isolation are going to be the best ways to get around some of those things. We're growing so many. So
Right, because isolation distance is important when seed saving.
of course, and depending what it is, tomatoes are fairly self-fertile, so they basically will gravity pollinate. So as long as you keep your tomato plants, let's say 10, 15 feet apart, say 80% of the tomatoes out there don't have that much of an anther exposed, so you don't have a lot of bumblebee pollination. You'll see that kind of happen with some of the larger flowers, like on some of the enormous beefsteaks and some of the cherries. So you just kind of, but some of those you can create a wonderful new tomato too in your backyard.
Right.
So that's what's so fun with open pollinating.
And so you're in the Pacific Northwest. Kind of take us on a mental tour of what your farm looks like.
So the Pacific Northwest, it's if you come to the farms and the farmers markets in the Pacific Northwest, they're pretty much just almost uncomparable, and even to some of those of France and some of the European farmers markets. I feel that the Northwest is kind of a gem for growing. The Willamette Valley, where we're located, is some of the most fertile ground from some of that alluvial ice shelf that millions of years ago was basically forced in. We have this beautiful volcanic activity, and so our soil is just so rich and so fertile that also our nights are a little cooler, and our summers until not really until recently have been fairly docile. So we've been able to grow a good amount of product with, let's say, tomatoes example, the thin skins, you don't have really super tough skins when you have the heat. You don't have a lot of disease and sun scald and things like that. With increased heat and increased moisture, we're typically dry for 3 months of the year. So during tomato season, when you want 90-degree dry weather and no rain in sight, it's tomato weather to me. So
Okay, that's good. And how much acreage are you working with?
I consider myself pretty much a micro farm. I mean, we really only work under like 1 or 2 acres.
Okay.
We're going to be doing some expansion this season, probably for some other grow outs and things like this. But we do work with some other farms for some of our seed grow outs. So some of our seeds, we do work with this year, some of our caracellos were grown out by a neighbor farm too. And so just working with some neighbor farms to do some of that is really fun as well.
When did you decide that seed saving was important?
So I started raising ducks, and
Ducks?
yeah, it's a whole nother podcast. We'll get into that later. I'm kind of a duck specialist, but
Really?
yeah. So I raised ducks for a lot of years. Raised the Ancona duck and the Saxony ducks. Pretty much brought them out of a critical category, and really learned about a lot of breeding and a lot of seed saving, because on the farm, one of the things that you need ducks for is, as Bill Mollison says, you don't have a snail problem, you have a duck deficiency.
Shortage.
Yeah, duck deficiency.
Exactly.
And so one of the things while we were gardening is we realized that we needed ducks. And so it kind of went hand in hand. And while learning the seed saving and all those tools, we started growing our duck business. As that, businesses go, our partnership split. I wanted to continue what I was doing. I don't do ducks anymore. I still have 2 beautiful Great Pyrenees dogs that are from that program, but we do a lot of just seed saving beyond, that you can imagine. So all of the things are done organically on the farm, but, all of the weird things that you would find everywhere on earth. So anywhere I travel or anywhere I, touch base with people that are in a different country, especially with the global way we're working now, you can get in touch with somebody and they'll send you seeds from all over the place. And so we definitely work with a lot of very interesting breeders locally too, like Brad Gates and the Wild Boar.
Yes.
He's a good friend of mine, and we touch base literally, a couple times a month to see how each other are doing and laugh at each other in our posts and things like that. And so, we have a really tight community of tomato growers, and I think there's a lot of other tomato growers on there that we really stay in touch with and really respect too. I think some of the work that people have done over the years, Fred Hemptel over at Artisan Seeds, he does some amazing tomatoes as well. So a lot of those tomatoes are in my market program and even in my catalog too as well. And that just goes to show you how much I respect their work and their tomatoes and their breeding. And so my catalog is comprised of a lot of heirlooms, but a lot of people new looms, if you want to call them.
New loom.
New looms.
I like that term.
Yeah, some people don't, but it's one to each their own. And it's essentially, just things that in 50 years, what are we going to be looking at and being like, oh, I remember those. Those were great. Because just 50 years ago, we're looking at some of these that the parentage is just from them to then as well.
Yeah.
And so there's definitely a great excitement behind what's going on right now in the breeding scene. You're seeing a lot of breeders kind of come onto the scene and try it for the first time, and a lot of breeders that are really getting into it. I feel like we're kind of in a renaissance of breeding right now.
Nice.
We're in a very uplifting time of a lot of new varieties coming to light. That globalization that I talked about too, the ability to travel and communicate with all these communities has really given us the ability to open up that world as well. So yeah, just a lot of fun stuff, right?
And so was it that motivation that started Heirloom Seedhouse?
Pretty much. I mean, I have zero passion for what I do, and so I think that what a lot of people have told me. I mean, that's really what leads everything. I mean, if you don't like what you do, you should just leave it right now and stop doing it because you're not going to want to enjoy this in 5 to 10 years. And so that goes along with what I do. And so I love to collect things. My love of collection is definitely like baseball cards, and I don't do that anymore, but I keep that vibe. I keep that vibe.
Your shirt for a second here. So I just described this to you listeners. It's a baseball jersey that says
my company's name,
Seedhouse, across the front of it with the number 5, and on the back it has your name on it, and there's a shoulder patch that says Heirloom Seedhouse on it, and the graphics are all florals and plants and flowers.
Yeah,
it's really
fun.
cool.
It's super fun.
Are you selling that anymore?
I know. I wish. These are actually really expensive to get made.
I imagine.
I was like, oh my gosh, it's going to cost that much, but I need one for
right now.
Especially when I wear the shows. I mean, it's just fun to have. Like I said, I love baseball. It's been a love of mine for a long time, but the collection of the cards when I was a kid, I would collect 1,000 and put them in a set, numbered order. But you do that 200 times over, so you had, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of numbers, numerologically organized.
Right.
And when I first started, I looked at the Seed Savers Exchange.
Oh yeah.
Yearbook. And if we all know, when we started collecting 20 years ago, they just had a yearbook that was a paper edition that was the size of your phone book that you would get, every
year.
And you'd go looking through it and you'd find what you want and you'd order
contact the
sellers. And they still do that. But my love started when I literally saw that. Because I was like, this is
a thing.
This is the connection between the old and the new, and the how I collect things, and so I feel like I found that, I guess, fairly young in life, where I guess a lot of people don't find that maybe till they're retired. So I was fortunate enough to be 23 years old and saving seeds, and since I'm twice that now, so. So yeah,
aren't we all?
Yeah. So I mean, that's the love of what you do, and it carries me through. Just being able to every year create new varieties and select new varieties, or contact somebody and be excited about the new stuff, and so.
Nice. So you came to the Heirloom Expo to talk about what?
So my whole talk this week is about ancestral collections. Is like I really am loving collecting and seeing what's going on with all of the wonderful new collections that are starting to, we just spoke about John Jackson is speaking here at the Heirloom Expo, and he is amazing collecting the diaspora and some of the African collections that are just really just exciting, and the indigenous collections that Stephen McCumber is talking about, and there's just so many specific collections that are really in need of, collecting more of. And the Italian collection, some of the collections over in like Czechoslovakia and some of where my family is from, and those regions of Europe, we're seeing like a lot of obviously Ukraine and some of this happening.
Right.
And that's a realistic thing that can happen, very much so. I mean, I'm first generation. My dad's Belgian, and he came here after the war, and they had zero idea how to plant or do anything because there was such a lack of food shortage. I was like, can you plant a potato? Like, did you plant? And he's like, we had to eat it.
Oh, right.
So when it comes to you go through such a loss in these war times, and so we all have experienced that somewhere in our family and our genetics, and so wherever it is in your genetics, we have to just keep on re-upping these wonderful biodiverse crops, and having multiple stewards of them is hyper important. So I think that's really the whole ethos behind what I do. Is I do collect primarily European stuff, but I do have some wonderful indigenous, like the Ozette potatoes I've been stewarding for literally the whole time I've been growing, and some other things that, and just very amazing vegetables that really fit into our program and our farm program, as well as our microclimate in our area. So, which is very hyper important to what we do and what you should do on your farm too, as well, or garden.
And around that, so for your particular region, are there any seeds or plants native to your region that you like to grow?
So we do have a few native crops. What's fun about some of the crops in the States is we don't have tons of actual super native crops. A lot of them are indigenous varieties, and so I do have the Ozette potato, which is actually been walked up here from Peru. It's really quite amazing in terms of its pre-colonial development in the central Washington coastal area near Lake Ozette. And the Maca tribe adopted that potato many years ago, and recently, over the last hundred, I guess, probably last decade or two, was basically allowed them released back into the public.
Cool.
I think just keeping those potatoes and those stories very intact to those original cultures, like the European tomatoes and some of those things that I collect. It's fun to see, so this culinary heritage can actually re-exist through culinary through dishes and things you actually do, traditional contests. I just posted something about a soup contest in Italy. Everybody would raise their own beans, their special beans for that village in like Aquila, and they would bring the 60 different families would bring all their soups, and they'd have a soup tournament. A soup off, and then a zuppa as the whole thing.
That's very cool.
Sagrada zuppa. And so, I just feel like that the fun of vegetables can go transcend so many different, areas in one's life, and also health. Not to go to the amount of health that you can get from gardening, just spiritually to just internally, is just quite intense. So another reason why I got into doing what I'm doing is just keeping very good health fit. So sure, yeah.
Now you also run a CSA from your farm. Does that work in conjunction with or against your seed saving efforts?
So it's really fun. I've actually spoken a lot of times about how to run a market farm. So I call it a market farm. I mean, the CSA is a small portion of our farmers market and our wholesale program. So the CSA, they pick up, we actually do a farmers market pickup. So they'll come and choose what they want from the farmers market. So it's kind of like a smart idea. It's not your traditional CSA model where we box everything up.
Yeah.
It saves us a lot of time actually too. And
that's
the model,
nice.
Everybody loves it because the number one thing I've heard is in CSA problems is turnover with not using what they get, and not being used to really what that is. And I understand uncomfortability is okay within the farming world, but only somebody can use like kohlrabi's, like
I was going to say kohlrabi
six times in a row they're going to get, or summer squash. I mean, they get a lot of summer squash, and
it gets real old real fast.
So they want diversity. That you want what you want, and I mean, not to say that you should force your CSA farmer and you're doing a market share program like that, but it's definitely interesting.
So I was interviewing someone earlier about how they grow specifically for seed saving, and not the produce. I mean, the produce is a byproduct of their their seed saving efforts.
Right. So this year with tomatoes, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Let's say you harvest 2,000 pounds of tomatoes in one day.
Yeah.
I have, let's say, 15 restaurants that'll take 1,500 pounds of those tomatoes. You have 500 pounds of tomatoes left. This
What are
is
you gonna
like
do?
a train is leaving Seattle at so you have 500 pounds of tomatoes left. You're just careful about what tomatoes you gave away. Like, so our field is tagged and flagged, and I know what's going where, and so I know I'm saving these back and this back, and don't give these away to the restaurants. So as long as you can hold back what you need and you can seed save what you need, we had 53 varieties saved off before September 1st and dry.
Amazing.
You know what I mean? Already done. And then I didn't bring any to the show today, but they're going to be released in our 24 catalog.
Okay.
So you're just it's organization, it's logistics, it's a little bit of isolation and working with some of your stuff, because obviously, like, sometimes we can't grow, like, it's hard to save certain things. I'll have other people grow certain things for me, because if I have to save like the peepos with that's very, because they're so promiscuous.
Right.
If you have to save one, and you have to be a mile away from the other one.
Right. And we're talking about cucurbitae pepo or pepo, which is one strain of usually summer squashes. Most summer squashes are pepo or pepo, and so they cross-pollinate.
It's probably
other
pepo. Pepo sounds
it's Latin. It's a dead language, so it's whatever people want it to be. I give everything the Italian pronunciation, so
there you go.
Whatever, it would probably be pepo if I did. Yeah, that's how I do it. Sure. Anyway, so let's talk about some of your favorite seeds, because you have a list of Evan's favorites on your online store, mostly peppers and tomatoes, and they look really interesting. And the peppers honestly look too hot for me, but what are some of your favorites?
Oh man, I mean, I always tell people, and I think that's the number one question besides where do you get your seeds, where do you get these varieties? Because I mean, do you come up with them? And some stuff we do, and some stuff like I said, we've bred and things, but it just depends what you're going to do with it too, because there's so many. We're culinary focused. This is not a novelty, based company. We're working with chefs directly, doing sensory evaluations, and they tell me they hate it. It's not coming back next year.
That's right.
So, and we had a couple of those this year actually too. We grew a couple of crops, and they're like, "There's no way we can use this," and I'm like, "Okay." And they were directly heritage cultural crops, and it is what it is. But in terms of favorites, I mean, if a fresh eater, I think. In terms of strikingly, the Starfighter Primes are like probably the world's most beautiful tomato. For eating, the Conare, I had to beg a lady, a Bulgarian lady, for about 3.5 hours for this tomato, because she wouldn't even give them away. They were just on display.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And she eventually gave it to me, and it has a whole festival in Bulgaria around this tomato.
Oh.
So culinarily, that probably is the best, like, overall eating tomato. I mean, Alice's Dream is a beautiful.
I grew that tomato this year. It really did well for me.
It's a very good tomato, disease-wise. Again, I like my Italian tomatoes. If you're going for a very traditional Italian dish, I mean, you cannot beat the Canestrino for a canner, for paste. I'll take it over San Marzano any day. I think it's just a overmarketed product, by the Italians, which is fine. I mean, we all overmarket some of our own things, but like I said, every tomato has its own use. I mean, we have storage tomatoes that I think are just incredible.
Let's talk about that, because you came up to me. We were talking earlier about winter tomatoes, and I of course went to the age-old belief that I have that winter tomatoes aren't a thing. Growing tomatoes in winter is not a good idea, and I don't recommend it. But you hold a different meaning to the term winter tomatoes. Tell us about that.
So in Oregon, we get one season.
Yeah.
We get one shot at it. I don't know what the second season thing is that you guys talk about. No. I have zero idea what you're talking about, because we plant in April and we're done in October.
Yeah.
And that's it. I mean, I don't, like, if I tried to plant something in January, we're frozen solid. I mean, not maybe solid, but we have temperate years where nothing's hanging on, So what these are is the Italians learned how to store tomatoes for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months in their root cellars, in their garages, their basements, for elongated periods of time that have viability and good umami, good flavor. They're not your slicers. They're more golf ball size varieties. I have a dozen or so in our collection. I brought about 6 to the show. The Pianello di Vesuvio is one of them. Um, that's more of the hanging one from Naples. It's actually, that's what it translates to. And that is a wonderful kind of 2 month variety. You can eat them, November, December, after September harvest, and we have this really full flavored tomato. Traditionally, they usually just smear it on a piece of bread
Oh,
and just
sounds
have
great.
that as, you can put some mozzarella, some Parmesan, some, Reggiano, whatever you want on that. But
Yes.
that's kind of like that November, December tomato.
Right.
And then you work into the Cane Torre, which is a more of the southern tomato, which is they'll hang these in these rosettes. Actually, the Pianellos are strung up in rosettes, but they're hung up by their trusses.
Mhm.
The Cane Torre are hung up, but they're actually woven together, each individual one, with the cotton that traditionally was raised between the tomato rows in the fields.
Oh, wow.
And so they were harvested, and then brought in, and they would do the cotton, they would do the tomatoes. They would take the tomatoes and string them up these rosettes. So when we were in some of these cities in Matera and some of these Adriatic coastal cities of the Italy, they basically would hang them, and you'd see them in their on their balcony and on their thing. They're very temperate down there, so where we are, we probably wouldn't put them outside on our balconies. But in your garage, if you hang these pianolos or these cane torres and some of these others, you have 2 to 3 months of beautiful red umame rich. I'm talking that red rich flavor.
Yeah.
After that, you start getting in a little different category of tomato, the Crispiana and some of the other ones. You can have like a 4 to 5 month storage, but they're more for soups and stews. They are, I wouldn't necessarily fresh eat them, even though I did have a friend try one at 4 months, and he was like, tastes like a tomato.
It's like a
I was
tomato.
like a little skeptical, but he did try one, and I didn't warn him at first. He just ate it like it was okay. So, yeah, so I think there's a whole nother level to being able to store it. I think a lot of people, especially within the our regions where you don't have a second production like we were talking about,
Mhm.
they don't have a second season to be able to try to get some other fruit off.
Yeah.
And in some other places in Italy and stuff like this, I don't think they do a second season on a lot of things.
And I don't do them where I live either, because by the time it gets to where, end of July, end of June is where the last time we plant anything is end of June in Los Angeles, because then temperatures are over 90 degrees. And by the time that happens, your pollen's dropping and going sterile. So we just don't, it's just not worth it. So,
Right.
Yeah. Do you have any tricks for maintaining purity when saving pepper seeds? Because those are a little more promiscuous, aren't they?
Right. So if you use just a regular agar cover, like the white woven fabric,
Like an agribon?
right, agribon,
Yeah.
you just cover those and leave them covered before your first pepper set, and then take them off after your peppers have just begun to just form their first little peppers after they pollinated. So usually like 3-4 weeks, let's say. And so just cover them all, and then remove the cover and just flag all the little ones, or just pull the crop that's first, and so you'll get 90-95% or more purity. You can bag too if you want.
Bagging.
I'm not a fan of bagging.
No?
I like a little bit of genetic alterations here and there, and
Yeah.
once in a while you'll get an email and said, I planted 5 of these, and 5 out of 6 of them, or so 4 out of 5 of them were red, and this one was black. And I said, well, you just made a new variety
There you
for
go.
me.
You get a rogue and you get a new variety.
So I think that's fun. I think letting people find the genetic diversity and the genetic palette for seeing that is not bad, as long as it's not too prevalent within your genetics. You want to have, I wouldn't necessarily try things next to each other and let somebody work on an open project like that. But yeah, so.
All right. Well, it is tip time.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite tip you'd like to share with the Garden Nerd audience?
Oh my gosh, watering tomatoes.
Tell me.
So I think the number one question I get asked about at farmers markets is, how often should I water my tomatoes? And it's one of those things where it's a little bit of a compost question. It's a little bit of a soil question too. How's your soil doing? Is it really dry? I mean, if you're in, really high, heavily composted soils, you probably can water a little less. But, with under, 2 days a week, I would say just water 'em once on Tuesday, and once on, let's say, Thursday or Friday, and then call it quits.
Okay.
I know how many people ask me, and how many people are just, I water them every day. And do not do that.
Don't do
So,
that.
yeah.
Why? Because
Well, you just get really bad mealy tomatoes.
Watery
Flavor,
tomatoes.
yeah, water is not flavor.
no.
That's what I always tell people.
Yeah.
Concentrate. So.
Right, and I've followed the trick, although it depends, because it's if your soil is sandy, you need to water more often. If your
Again.
containers, you need to water more often. But
Again.
but still, generally, you want to make them suffer a little bit.
Right.
They-
I think that's always the trick, is like
Yeah.
the suffrage creates fruit. And
Right.
so it actually creates more of a, people, you don't want the leaves wilting up, but you definitely want the fruit building up some concentration in there. And then you water it again right when it thinks it's not getting water anymore, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and then after, another really quick trick on the same tip, just harvest your tomatoes before you water them, obviously. So I'll water right after I harvest. So I'm kind of putting on, so I'll harvest and I'll water. And it's also a good like twice a week thing to remember. So you go out there, harvest, and then water, and then you go harvest again. So it kind of creates, because it flushes the new tomato set out too. So yeah.
Good idea. Well, thank you so much, Evan, for your time and for that favorite tip of yours. Several favorite tips of yours. Thanks for being a guest on the Garden Nerd podcast. Where can people find you online?
At Heirloom.seedhouse.com. It's the easiest way to find all about our seeds and all of our wonderful things that we do and stuff like that. So,
And are you on social media?
yeah, at Heirloom Seedhouse on Instagram and Facebook, and I think what else? What's the other one?
Twitter?
Yeah, I think
X.
Farmer Evans on Twitter. Yeah,
Farmer
that guy's on Twitter. Who else is YouTube? That's right. We do have a YouTube. Yeah, I believe that's Heirloom Seedhouse. So.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. All right, Garden Nerds, you will find a link to Evan's website and online store this week at Gardenerd.com. We'll also share links to his social media feed so you can look at all the garden eye candy that there is to see. And believe me, there is a lot of it. That's it for this week. Subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen. Visit us for tons of free gardening information at Gardenerd.com. Consider becoming a Patreon subscriber to support all the free stuff we do here at Garden Nerd. You'll find us on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter under Garden Nerd 1, on Facebook as GardenNerd.com, and of course, our Garden Nerd YouTube channel. Happy gardening!